steal any more thunder from Tim. So everybody please welcome Tim Brown.
Thanks, Craig. Thank you. First of all, thank you to Craig and Natalie. They really made tonight easy and had things all set up and ready to go and walked me through some of the technical parts, and I appreciate that. Natalie's also the bouncer in case there are any hecklers in here. First, I want to welcome everyone. Thank you for attending the presentation tonight on the exciting topic of foraging. And Craig's mentioned a little bit about me. I did graduate from Perrysburg High School. I have some connections here. We lived in town for quite a while. Went to the University of Toledo, got into the legal field. And then a few years ago, my wife and I moved to Bowling Green, and we purchased a 7-acre property that has a pond, and it's a very interesting property, very close to one of the Park District's facilities, and that's the Wood County Historical Museum. We walk down there all the time. Our property has a pond. It has several microenvironments to it, what I call it. We've got woods, meadow. We've got a stream in the back, which is actually a part of the Portage River system. And then we got a whole bunch of grass that requires a John Deere to cut. And as Craig mentioned, when we moved there a dozen years ago or so, I had seen these cattails. And in the process, I was kind of developing an interest in survival skills. And there were a couple of TV shows on at the time on the Discovery Channel. One was Dual Survivor, and one was called Survivor Man. And so I would watch these, and they were, you know, some of it you figure is staged, but really most of it was them showing you how to build a shelter, start fire, basically from scratch. And one of the skills that they often talked about was foraging. Well, I'm staring out at my 7 acres thinking, well, that's some, you know, I don't know how good I'll be at building a fire, but at least I know we've got a lot of vegetation on this property. So I started with cattails, and I only ate one part of it. Craig went on to some of the other parts of the plant, but, and then I just kind of went from there. And I apologize for my voice, but I have a vocal cord that doesn't work, and so I'm operating on one, hence the microphone. Let's see if I can find, there's that's a plant catalog that's in my book. I'll talk about that in a second. Those are all edible wild plants that I have foraged on our property and eaten. And we have more, but I ran out of space there. So as you can see, there's quite a variety there. Well, okay, so that's the book cover, because my interest led me to want to write about it. But every guide that I was seeing, and I'll send around some samples of foraging guides, were really technical and kind of boring. And so I thought, well, I want to learn skills and I want to learn about plants, but I don't really need to know, you know, their scientific botanical names and things like that. So hence, that's part of the lazy, okay? The lazy is that what we're going to talk about today is something that's really easy for all of you to do, okay? And that's really how I would like to present this, and hope that you walk out thinking, now I get it. You know, now there are some things that I can do if you happen to be interested. So let's talk a little bit about the book. I published it about 6 months ago. It has artwork from my daughter. She also contributed to the authorship on a couple of the chapters. My 90-year-old uncle did some of the artwork at the very beginning of the book. He has since passed. I was thankful that we got it published, and he had a copy in hand and was able to see his work in a published form before that. So let's go to, that's the table of contents for the Lazy Forager, available through Amazon. And what I'd like to explain to you is that up to page 41 is a lot of the real usable information if you're interested in the subject and interested in possibly pursuing it yourself. I try to present it in a lighthearted fashion so it doesn't start looking like one of these technical guides, but that's where you're going to get most of that information. The second half of the book, starting with Hector on page 41, is just fun that I had with the subject. And frankly, some of the chapters are just barely relevant to foraging. But as you can see, I tie it into music and American history. We have a little quiz that nobody can fail, and there's some things for kids. I have underage foraging is a piece on what you can do with kids in the realm of foraging. So that's the book. I do have copies if anybody's interested, but you could always get it on Amazon if you walk out of here and change your mind and decide you want to pick up a copy. They're not very expensive, so. All right, and then there's a handout. I don't know, Craig will be taking care of that, but that's got chapter 11, which in this case is Write It Yourself, page 53. So if you get one of the handouts and you read it and it actually stimulates you to want to write an ending to these two scenarios I give you, in that chapter, there's a email address that you can send your creative work to, and I'd love to see it if you happen to be so inclined. All right, let's start off with a basic question, which is why forage? And I'm going to just read excerpts at times. It's not going to be reading from the book the whole time, but let me read this from the book, Why Forage? It is definitely not to be the hippest person in the room. Foraging brings to mind someone like the eccentric Yule Gibbons, a 20th century outdoorsman and early health food advocate who it is said could fully digest your wooden dining room chair in the time you were away at the salad bar. This is a skill appreciated by very few. But we can learn from Mr. Gibbons' enthusiasm. After all, an important foraging benefit is the consumption of super nutritious food. Another is the botanical education a forager picks up while roving in search of provisions. Of course, there are many other side benefits like free food, physical activity, and plenty of time alone with your thoughts, since you learn through repeated experience that people you invite to forage with you appear to have remarkably busy schedules. All right, let's see, let's go to, I forgot we put them at the end and not the beginning. All right, there we go. You're looking there at mulberry leaves and fruit. The leaves are edible, but the fruit's the good part. So what is foraging? I mean, we've been throwing this term around here, and I had mentioned the idea of roving in search of provisions. Now, that sounds a little bit like a military action, but it's a very broad category, and the type of foraging that we'll talk about here and through the book is more about foraging for nutritional purposes and foraging vegetation, all right? So an example, of course, are mulberries. And I don't know about any of you, but when I was growing up, I saw mulberries all the time and I never ate one of them, all right? I don't know why. I guess I assumed nobody else is eating them, I'm not gonna eat them, maybe there's something wrong with them or something like that. They're a great foraged food. And kids like them, our grandkids, that was their first introduction to the idea of eating a wild plant. We've got multiple mulberry trees in our yard, so we can gather enough to actually do stuff with. Now, I'm a lazy forager, so I don't cook and do things like that. I just kind of like to grab them and eat them. But anyway, that's an example of foraging. Now, there are two plant categories that I forage. One are just wild plants, and that would be an example, or a very common one that we'll talk about quite a bit tonight, are dandelion greens. And y'all, if you're not killing them in your yard and you're not spraying chemicals on your yard, then you probably have dandelion greens, and you probably realize that they are edible. So that would be just one example of a wild plant. The second category, which is a little more unusual, is plants grown by humans, but not for consumption purposes, all right? And an example of that are hostas, all right? We've got hostas all over our yard. And they have actually pretty long edible season, but they're really good, you know, at first, even when the leaves aren't quite to full size. And if you cut one up and throw it in your salad, if you've tested to make sure that your system can handle the new food, then I think you'd be surprised. It's really pretty tasty. And again, is it a wild plant? Not really, because it got planted by my wild wife, but it is, it was not planted as a food source. So that's the other category that I look at, and there's quite a few in that list I showed you that fall into that. Another example, as I ramble on here, is our roses. And almost all rose petals are edible, and they're really quite good. There's no bitterness to them or anything like that. Plus, you get a little bit of the scent, the aroma. But you have wild roses, and you have, you know, roses somebody, you know, planted, and they both work as an edible source. All right, another reason why I call my type of foraging lazy foraging is because, as I mentioned, I don't cook. I don't really dig things up like roots and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff underground that's, you know, especially if you were in a survival situation, you would want to know how to harvest those, okay? I'm lazy, so I'm picking stuff off from the top. Now, one of the things about leaving the root of the plant underground is it can grow more leaves and things, and so there is that advantage. But for me, trail snacks, salads, sandwiches, omelets, you know, stuff like that, that's what I use my foraged food in. I was telling Craig, I got a buddy, he and I over the last couple of years have hiked pretty much every hikeable trail in Northwest Ohio and Southeast Michigan up to Ann Arbor. And Ed has developed this interest in foraging because we're walking along the trails and I'm pointing things out, and he's actually become kind of an expert on things that I didn't know too much about, like wild raspberries, and then there's the brand new one we discovered this year, which are pawpaws. Does anybody know what a pawpaw is? Yeah. Has anybody eaten pawpaw? Do the people who've eaten pawpaw like pawpaw? It really is good.
I like it.
Yeah, It's been compared to kind of a citrusy banana, pudding or that sort of a texture to it. They're really good. They're much more common in central and southern Ohio, as far as Ohio goes. But Ed and I managed to find one over at Swan Creek Park and immediately gobbled it up. And it was the first and only pawpaw I've had, but it was really good. So there's a big pawpaw festival somewhere in southern Ohio every year. We're going to go next year. Now, again, as mentioned, we're concentrating here on nutritional foraging. There is medicinal foraging, and I haven't done too much of that, but I will tell you a little anecdote, which is the same daughter who contributed to my book. We were spending time at her house, and she got brushed up against some stinging nettle, and she had shorts on and t-shirt, whatever it was. And which actually I've come to find stinging nettle is an edible plant, but you got to do a lot of processing with it. But it's also a stinging plant. And so I had read that broadleaf plantain, which is in your yard whether you know it or not, unless you chemically treat your yard, all right, that could be used in a situation where you have a bug bite or a skin irritation or something. So Kristen was going to go for the topical cream or whatever, and I said, could we try something first? Because she had all sorts of broadleaf plantain in her yard. And so I picked some of the plantain leaves, I gave them to her. Now if you're out in the wilderness doing this, then you use what's called a chew poultice, and that's where you chew it up to get the chemicals and stuff. And then you can either try to adhere it to the irritation, or you can just, brush it. And in this case, we were close to her house, so she ran some water on it and then crunched it up. And she just kind of applied it on the skin irritation. I'm going, I hope this works. And sure enough, it gave her almost instant relief. But the surprising thing to me was how long it lasted, because she was still good an hour later, Now, I doubt if she went back out and got more plantain when it wore off, but that's my brush with medicinal foraging. Now, I got to ask a question, maybe with a show of hands here. And how many of you have now that you have even a better idea of what we're talking about, how many of you have ever foraged a wild plant to eat other than mushrooms? Can I see oh, fantastic. That was really more than I thought we were going to get. Could we list a few? Anybody want to volunteer? Those who put their hands up, do you want to yell out a plant that you foraged and ate?
Elderberries.
Oh, I want to, hold on a second. Sorry about my awful handwriting. Where did you forage blueberries? Who mentioned?
Blackberries.
Oh, blackberries.
Blueberries is Michigan.
Okay.
Raspberries.
Wild raspberries.
Violets.
Oh, we're going to talk about violets. Who said violets? Thank you.
What about walnuts?
Yep. Now, on the nuts stuff, all right, some of those really require a lot of processing. If you think about an acorn, something like that, anything that you have to soak, and they have what's called tannins that are not edible, and so you got to soak the tannins out. But walnuts wouldn't be that. Any others? What's that? Pecans. Huh? You were down south? Huh? Oh, we have a hosta. I'm not the only one in the room, huh? Anyone else?
Chokeberries.
I am not familiar with them. I've heard of them.
They don't taste good.
How do you consume them?
I just picked it off the tree.
And ate it? Okay.
They're really sour.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes something that's really sour still kind of tastes good. You know, you just can't eat too much of it.
Service berries?
Service berries, I've heard of those. I'm not familiar with them, but I know they're,
Those are really tasty.
pretty sweet. Where do you find them?
A lot of they're really common in landscaping, just like around the city, because they're such pretty trees, but they're also edible. They taste like blueberries mixed with like apple mixed with almond.
Nice, nice. You know, ornamentals are a common source as well of things that you can forage. And one of my favorites that people use around their yards and stuff is Rose of Sharon, and which is, by the way, one of the only edible wild plants mentioned in the Bible. But Rose of Sharon is delicious. And it really goes well in salads. So if you can identify, those are the ones where they're the flowers that grow up on the big sort of bushes and stuff, and they get used, like I say, more for ornamental purposes. Okay, well that's a great list, some of which I've not. Tell us about pecans. Who said that?
Texas, there's a lot of pecan trees down in Texas.
And some of them are wild or on a path where you can forage them. They're not necessarily been planted for production or anything. Yeah, very interesting. Are the wild ones that you would have foraged any different from the pecans that we see in the store? Are they smaller?
They were when we ate them.
Okay, good. Sometimes we'll see that. Good example there are blackberries. We've got a lot of wild blackberries in our yard, but the berry is really quite a bit smaller than the blackberries that you see that are commercially grown and produced. Also, wear gloves when you forage wild blackberries. Craig, you'll let me know when time becomes a problem, although there is a clock there too. All right, so we talked about mulberries. I want to, real quick, there's a distinction between edibility and palatability, okay? And and this is true with all foods, isn't it? There are foods that you just don't like, all right? Does it mean they're not edible? No, it doesn't. Does it mean if you eat it, it's going to upset your stomach? Not necessarily, right? What it means is you don't like the taste and you're not going to eat it, all right? Well, and that's true with a lot of forageables as well. So now, okay, next subject is where, all right. These are called autumn olive berries, all right? Or probably more commonly known as olive berries. But the autumn is descriptive because they do tend to come out in the fall, and they don't have a real long season, but it can overlap. Not really into early winter, but certainly later in the fall. Now, they're all pretty much dropped right now. But the thing about autumn olive berries is that I probably saw them 100 times and I had no idea. They're just kind of inconspicuous, you know? And they are delicious. They are really one of my favorite berries to forage. They have a distinctive coloring of where it's not usually, although the picture to the right would belie this, but most of the time they're not usually bright red, okay? They're a duller red, and then the way you distinguish them from similar plants, in particularly honeysuckle, because honeysuckle leaves are roughly the same size. The berries are roughly the same size. The berries are red, but the honeysuckle berries are bright red. And the olive berries are just a kind of a grayer red, if you will. then you say, well, we'll talk a little bit about plant identification yet, but on the case of an olive berry, the underside of that green leaf is silvery gray, okay? And that's what distinguishes it from just about any other berry. And it's important not to eat honeysuckle. I don't think it's toxic, although it might be if you ate a lot of them. They're just, I guess, very, very bitter. And they grow in the exact same places that the olive berry does. So sometimes they're right next to each other. All you gotta do is check that leaf and notice the color of the berry, and you'll probably be able to identify it then. And when some of these bushes are, well, you can see right there, I mean, you can just get hundreds of them in no time at all. All right. More audience participation, all right? We've talked a little bit about this, but where do you think are some places that might be promising places for you to forage other than your own property, your own backyard?
I'm from West Virginia. Foraging is a big deal down there. All my family does it.
Where are some of the, and within West Virginia, like where does your family go when they want to forage?
In the hills.
Okay.
That.
Okay.
Ginseng is one of the biggest ones. They actually harvest it and they do sell it.
Sure.
So they make money off of that.
Right.
Wild onions, wild strawberries.
Mm-hmm.
Just a few, and the honey, they did honeysuckle. We used to suck on the blossoms as a kid.
Oh, okay. You know, the blossoms are different. You're right.
But we didn't eat them, but we
Right.
sucked them.
Yeah, because they have a sweet honey sort of a.
Get candy and stuff.
Right.
You get something sweet that way.
Well, were you on public property?
No, they all own land and.
Okay, so they were foraging on their own property. How about properties that you don't own? Where might be a promising place or two to forage on?
Public parks.
Yes, public parks. That's a big one. And like I said, when Ed and I, do all this hiking at all these public parks, there are all sorts of foraging opportunities. We wouldn't get any walking in if we just stopped and foraged all the time, but that's a great place. Other places? Yeah.
By the river.
Yeah, that's a great place, by the river. Usually public, so you're not trespassing, and you go down by the river. I'll bet you my son Eric has done a little foraging by the river too. He spends a lot of time there. And we have that stream in the back of our property, and we see different type of vegetation as you get closer to the water. A good example that I think you mentioned are wild onions and wild garlic. Those tend to grow in wetter soil, and so we get a ton of it, and that's another one of those things where I don't dig under and take the whole plant. I just pick the leaves and stems off, and then use that. Where else? Can you think of any other place? Yeah.
Like along country roads, I found a lot of good stuff.
Absolutely. Which brings me to the idea of why foraging is really living on the edge. All right, and it's because of what she said. It is so much of what is good to forage grows on perimeters, on edges of paths, around buildings, along fence lines. And part of the reason is because that soil is usually considered disturbed soil, and disturbed soil is good soil for what other people like to call weeds, but we like to call edibles. And so those are all good places as well. We have a farmer's field to the east of our property, and so you've got cultivated soil, and then we've got what I just call a buffer strip of wild vegetation, and then we've got the grass that I have to cut, and in that strip of very disturbed soil, we get just a wealth of different wild plants that I can forage. You do want to stay a little bit away from sidewalk edges and roadway edges. Roadways more for car and vehicle sorts of emissions, and then sidewalks because of dogs and pets, you know. Now, before you get too wound up about, you know, did somebody's dog visit this green that I'm going to pick, all right? One thing is that it does rain occasionally, all right? And so vegetation does get cleaned now and then, right? The other thing is, if you're going to pick where there's any suspicion of that, don't eat it right away. Just take it home, clean it, wash it off really good, and you're good to go. All right. Let me give you an unusual example of another place to forage. All right, you can forage on private property with proper permission. I play golf on a course not treated with chemicals. During a round, I sometimes discover and harvest apples, field garlic, and other wild edibles in areas far off the beaten path, which is also where I usually find my golf ball. All right. All right. Let's talk about one of the more important things to get to, which is plant identification, all right? The first thing to remember is don't get too paranoid about this subject. People think if I don't properly identify a plant and then I pop it in my mouth, I'm going to die, all right? Well, that's not how it goes, other than in 1 or 2 instances. I haven't tried either of those, so as you can tell. Most people can eat the vast majority of what we call edible plants that are properly identified, okay? But we'll talk about sampling, and we'll talk about first identification, all right? Let me, if I could, pass these around. I'll get one over to this side of the room. All right, how does one go about identifying edible plants? Well, the first rule is use at least 2 sources, okay? And if you're somebody who doesn't have access to the internet or doesn't really like using computers or something like that, 2 different books is fine, all right? 2 different guidebooks like we're passing around. One of them going around is on Rocky Mountain foraging. So there are a lot of regional foraging books too that are even more helpful, Midwest or even specifically your state. But always use 2 sources for identification. Now, I have a phone app called What's This, or Picture This, and it's very reliable, and it's a free app. They have a paid version, but I use the free app. I just don't look at the ads when they come up. And so there, what you do is you take a picture of any plant, a tree, whatever you want, but you think, oh, I think that might be one of those, or I need to confirm an identification or something. So I'll snap a picture and it tells you what it is, and it's right the vast majority of the time, all right? But you'd still want to use that as just one of 2 of your identification sources, all right? Now, in my case, when foraging in the backyard, when I take that picture, one of the things that I can easily do is just head inside with the plant. I'm hoping it's something I can touch. Most of them are fine there. And then take it in, and then I've got this initial identification. I just sit down in front of the computer and get online. You can get close-ups of, the plant and really get specific with it. And that's a good way to do it too. But you can also use your phone app and one of those guides. And so identification is important. Once you've identified the plant, then you want to know if it's edible. And those guides will help you with that too. Going online is really a good way to establish, because you can check 2, 3, 4 different sources online if you want to make sure this thing's edible. Sometimes there is disagreement too. So, All right, now, what about plant sampling? You've got something, you've identified it, you know what it is, everybody's telling you it's edible, but you want to know for yourself, okay? Let's look at the violet. Somebody mentioned that, and thank you, and we listed that. We've got a ton of violets in our yard too, and they're very small ones, they're a particular type. They're extremely edible. They're really a nice taste. They are easy to gather in large bunches. They're very easy to process. You really don't have to do much with them, and you can just toss them in your salad. They even make your salad look good. And if you say to yourself, okay, we've got violets in our unchemically treated yard, and I want to see if I can eat one, then all you need to do really is just pick one, and then just eat one little blossom, all right? And then, because if it doesn't agree with you, that much probably isn't going to bother you too much. But then just wait for about a half hour, and then say, I still feel good. I think I'm going to have more of those. And you can add that to your list then, of things that you can forage and consume. Now, I did make a mistake on identification. We have rose hips, a lot of rose hips in our backyard. They're still out there. And I've got a bunch in the fridge. And I don't really eat them, I just use them in tea. And they're a very good source of vitamin C. But they're not the real big size, they're kind of the medium size. All right, so then I found some small rose hips in our yard, and I assumed, oh, well, since I tolerate the medium size, I'm gonna try these. So I put them in my tea, I drank the tea, I didn't sample them, and I'm sorry that I did it that way. So I suffered, it wasn't that bad, it was just indigestion and that, and I said, I know where that came from, it was those little rose hips, and I won't consume those anymore. So that would be probably the worst that's going to happen to you. Okay, we got a few minutes here. Those are lilacs. Bet you didn't know you could eat those. They're really good. They're pretty good. You want to get those right peak season. When they get a little older, they're not as tasty. You can still eat them. All right. And then, let's see. These are elm trees and leaves. Elm leaves are very distinctive once you learn how to identify them. And they're nice. They have only in the spring, and when they first come out, and they have a very nutty taste to them. And I certainly recommend those. And then, okay, there's your dandelions. And over to the right is something called dock, D-O-C-K, and there are different kinds of dock. And now I am going to make an admission to criminal conduct, all right? Right to Craig, all right? All right. The Wood County Historical Museum plants gardens. One of their little patches is all edible greens and herbs, okay? And I'm very familiar with dock. In our backyard, we have curly dock, which is what that is, and we have something called plain dock, right? And they're both really good. But the Historical Museum's patch had something I had never seen called lemon dock. And I identified it, and I said, that's it, you know. Now, I wasn't sure if I was allowed to sample that or not, so I covertly approached the patch, made sure nobody else was around, right? It's kind of hidden from most of the grounds, thank goodness. I made sure there were no cameras around, and then I proceeded to pick a leaf of the lemon dock, so Craig, it was me. It was the best dock I've ever had. Some of the other good dock that I had early on, and this is very common too, a lot of edible greens grow, we talked about living on the edge, on the perimeter of a garden. Okay, well, the garden's disturbed soil and all that. All right, so here's my son in the front row over here, and he's planted a garden. I don't remember what you were growing in that particular patch.
Lettuce.
Okay, so I'm not the least bit interested in his lettuce, all right? But along the back, just outside of the cultivated soil, is some of the best dock I've ever seen. It looked just like that. So I asked him, I said, can I have your weeds? And he said, sure, take as many as you want. So I ended up taking home a bunch of curly dock. And thank you for that, Eric, I appreciate that. And we weeded his garden. All right. A twofer, exactly. Okay, another point about gathering and harvesting is the idea of invasive species, okay? And I'm going to read a definition to you of what is an invasive species. I think it's one of those things where we all have kind of an idea of what it is. This definition says it's a non-native species that causes harm to the environment, economy, or human, animal, or plant health. Now, just because it might compete with a native species doesn't necessarily make it invasive, okay? But when you do see an invasive species and you're foraging and you kind of like that species, you're encouraged to take as much as you want, okay? Now, if you're in your own yard, all right, there's kind of a rule of thumb that you don't forage more than 1/3 of whatever you're looking at, all right? You're thinking about feeding wildlife, you're thinking about, foraging that same area a little later and so forth, and regrowth and all that. So that rule does not apply for invasive species. And invasive species include that plantain that I had mentioned before that has the medicinal purpose too. And then there's something that you might be familiar with called garlic mustard. And it's very distinctive when you learn what it is and you say, okay, yeah, you'll recognize that. And it's really very edible, and it does have a little bit of a mustardy kind of a zing to it. It's a really good wild edible, but it is an invasive species. So if you see garlic mustard, tear as much of it up as you want. All right. If you're not just trail snacking and you're picking edibles, they will last in the fridge for a while, okay? Now, remember, these are not being grown for production or anything. They're wild, and so they're not going to last as long as a commercially produced vegetation. But if you wash them and then let them dry, okay, and then just throw them in a plastic bag, they'll be good for usually 3 days or so. Another reason why you don't over-forage a patch, because once you're done with those 3 days, you want to go back out and get some fresh, you can do that. Okay, another question for the audience. This is a very educated audience, I have to tell you. And some of you know a lot more about this subject than I do, but any theories, why do you think some edible plants, and that would include, there are many of them, but that would include dandelion greens, arugula, all right? Why do you think some of those taste bitter? Why do we have bitter taste? And by the way, that tends to keep them from being commercially produced, right? Or if they are, they're going to be grown in such a way where that bitterness is going to be bred out. But why are they bitter? Okay, well, that is actually one reason, all right? There's certain, what they call phytochemicals in these greens and plants, that's mostly greens, that cause that bitter taste, but have a healthy benefit for you. All right, one of them is something called a flavonoid, if you've heard of that. And they're just naturally occurring compounds. They give it a little bit of a bitter taste, but they are healthy for you. Any other theories on this?
Maybe because some animals don't eat them?
Yes, that's another one, exactly. You know, just as plants or flowers or so forth develop attractive qualities like a sweet berry or a bright colored flower or whatever, in order to attract bees or other insects that are necessary for the propagation of that plant, you also have plants that try to repel certain invaders, and one of the ways to do that is with a bitter taste. You know, sometimes that too has to do with the stage of the plant, and so if it needs to survive a little bit longer, you know, it may have that bitter taste till then. Any other ideas?
I think it's obviously designed that way, but it's also designed that way so that it doesn't get, it's evolutionary.
Yes.
So that, you know, it doesn't get killed in.
Yeah, survival, right?
Yeah.
Of that plant?
Evolutionary process.
Yes.
And so it's only attractive to certain things.
Yeah.
And like the other person said, you know, it is safe from, you know, the animals that it's not supposed to be eaten by, et cetera.
That's right. And if those animals or insects or something change over long periods of time, you'll see the qualities of that plant that can change at the same time for those reasons. Right, very good. And then one other thing that's kind of an obvious one is the stage of ripeness of the plant, because a lot of plants, as you well know, whether you're growing them in a garden or whether they're growing wild, they're going to have a different taste when they're green versus when they ripen versus when they're overripe and that. And so that's another explanation for bitterness in some plants. Okay, we're almost done. Let's see here. Let's just talk a little bit about some other plants. I love this plant. I talk about it a lot in the book. It's called a purple dead nettle. It's a great name for a heavy metal rock group, but it is really quite tasty. You can eat the stalks and the flowers and the leaves. They're very distinctive looking, as you can tell. And I think they are considered invasive. I'm not sure about that. But that is purple dead nettle. It's kind of a pink purple. Whoops, let's see here. Okay, we've talked about quite a few of these. Okay, there's lilacs, violets. We might have covered these. Wild raspberries, right? And I actually don't run across these very often, but I'm not sure I have a good eye for them because my hiking buddy seems to be able to spot a wild raspberry from a mile away. So, all right, those are blackberries, I think. Oh, no, those are mulberries, right, right. And that's it on our pictures. All right.
You mentioned that you could eat lilacs?
Mm-hmm. No, just the flower.
Flower?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yep, yep.
Like in a salad kind of thing?
Yeah, actually, you can eat it right off the
I've never tried that.
right off the plant. It's got there's something within the flower that has this nuttiness to it that is surprising, because that's not what you would think. You'd think you were eating perfume, you know, but it's actually got a little bit of a nutty flavor to it. Now, that's another season that doesn't last a long time, and you don't really want to eat them later in the later stages. I mean, they're just not as good.
You mentioned some hostas. I have some hostas that have some really nice blooms of flowers on them.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just the leaves of the hosta?
You can eat the flowers too. Yeah, I usually just go for the leaves, but you can eat the flowers. And you know, On the back of the book is a daylily, if you're familiar with those. Those are very edible. Almost every part of the plant on a daylily is edible. That's another one of those where you're eating something that wasn't necessarily planted for, for consumption. Now, some of you may know that when you plant some daylilies, next year you might find other daylilies even in a different part of the yard. So I guess you could call those kind of wild, but okay. And then in closing, I would like to read one more excerpt from the book, which I borrow from the musical world and call Postlude. Many important social and political issues face the world's citizenry today. Foraging isn't one of them. However, I strongly endorse the practice as a way of temporarily escaping modern society's noisy, social media-dominated environment by devoting time to a calmer, more introspective, but still productive pastime. Nature has a way of smoothing out some of the rough spots in our lives with its actual, not virtual, reality. Using a little foraging knowledge to discover yet another edible plant in the backyard really does imbue one with a sense of discovery and satisfaction. So please, take what you have learned tonight and try a journey into the world of foraging. Make sure to have a few laughs along the way, even when they come at your expense. Now, does anybody have any other questions before we close? Okay, Mr. Zbansky, yes.
So, first of all, I found this very interesting.
Well, thank you.
And I didn't realize how many weeds out there that you could use.
Yeah.
Okay, but from your perspective, do you look at it as more of as a hobby and a challenge to when you discover something new, you always ask yourself, I wonder if I can eat that?
No.
Okay.
What happens is when you begin to forage and you start to expand that, you're usually, there are exceptions, you're usually able to spot something that's possibly edible, all right? Let me give you a real quick example here, which is if you see a green plant later in the summer or in the season, and it doesn't have a single bug bite taken out of it, it's probably not edible, all right? So what you can start to do is get this sense of, that could be edible, I don't think I'm gonna waste my time trying to find out about that. Once you do that, if you have that plant app and you got your phone with you, it's a really nice, quick way to go to snap that picture. I'd say I'm probably right 50% of the time in terms of a guess on that a particular plant is edible. But up until I started foraging, I never looked at a plant for that reason, you know. So you start to develop this mindset, and then you start to be able to kind of parse out what might be edible and what isn't. Does that?
Are you looking for stuff that you really like the taste of?
Well, it doesn't matter because when I sample it, if I like it, then I will, especially if it's simple to do, you know, like it's in my backyard or something, then I'll forage it, right? But if I taste it, I've made a positive ID, and it is definitely edible, and I try it, and I go, yeah, that's not that great. I don't waste my time on it then. There's too many other things that I already know I like that I can spend my time on. And they overlap seasons. So you get in the springtime, we talked about wild onions and wild garlic. Man, those things are the first things to pop up at the end of winter, right? And sometimes you can see them growing through the snow. So that's your first foraging of the year usually. Chickweed's another one. Chickweed grows early on, all right, early spring. It goes away in the summer because there's not enough moisture for it. And then it pops back up in the fall. And so that's another one. But so they have different seasons, and some of them are really long. We talked about the wild violet. The violets on our property pop up in April, and they are there until September, October, you know. So, and they're still edible. They don't really lose a lot of their quality. So we also have these different seasons we look for.
And then one last question, does the hostas that your wife plants,
Yeah.
does you eat them? Does she eat them?
Right. If it's planted by my wife, I do not eat them unless I have permission. Yeah.
Does she eat them?
No, heck no.
Does she eat any of the stuff you eat?
She's not here today for a reason. Yeah. All right. Mr. Brown.
Does wild garlic form bulbils or a bulb?
Yeah. Yep. Dig down there and you'll find those. Yeah.
Did you have grape muscari on one of your lists?
We actually had those in our backyard one year. The fruits, we still get the grape leaves. We get a ton of grape leaves in our yard. Grape leaves are really good forageables. Throw it in a salad, using them like the Greek recipes call for. They're a little smaller than the ones that Greek recipes use. But one year we actually had the grapes themselves, and they were the muscara, I think, and they were pretty good. Again, those wild fruits are going to be a little smaller usually than if they're commercially grown.
We didn't talk about ramps. Ramps are one of the most popular things you need to find.
Yeah, and I have never seen or foraged for a ramp, but yeah, they're used in,
They're all over the place.
and they're used for culinary purposes and that too. And I don't talk about mushrooms because those are a little higher risk. Edible, I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm sure this isn't being taped up for YouTube. But there is one type of mushroom that I will forage and eat. And one of the reasons is it is so easy to identify. Now, I don't remember the plant name, but I call them black ink mushrooms, all right? They look like a little umbrella, and underneath is a very dark black color. And as they get older, then it turns into black ink. I guess other civilizations would have used that for ink, but they are really tasty. They're easy to identify. They pop up in our yard in certain places only after rainstorms. So I'll kind of keep an eye out for them then. And so I'm not completely anti-mushroom, but just be very careful if you're going to do that. Other questions? Yeah.
I've been wondering about pine.
Uh-huh.
Can I eat every pine tree? What can I eat? Can I eat the cones?
Craig, are we okay still to keep going, or do you want to stop?
Questions go till 8.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay. All right. Everybody else will walk out, but I'll be here. Yeah. Excited as ever. Yeah. Okay. Pines. First of all, pine needles are really good for teas, and if you put them in your same teacup with those rose hips, then you've got yourself a really healthy tea that's got a nice little flavor to it. I usually add honey. So that's one part of the pine tree, okay? On pine cones, there are pine nuts inside, all right? Those you've got to really wait until the cones are kind of like turning brown and that. And when you crack them open, you can shake out some seeds. When things require, I emphasize the word lazy, all right, because when things require too much processing, I just don't do it, all right? And getting nuts out of a pine cone requires time and effort, and probably from a calorie point of view isn't really worth it. There's another thing, though, about pine trees, not well known. You would never do this except if you were starving, if you were in a survival situation, all right? And some pine trees, and I believe white pine is one, if you take the bark off, all right, if you have a blade or something and you can strip bark off, all right, it's going to damage the tree. That's why you don't do this unless you're strict survival. There's a layer called the cambium layer, all right? And the nutrients for a tree come up from the ground and flow through the cambium layer. And if you strip cambium layer off of a pine tree, or off a pine tree, then you can treat it like a source for starches and stuff like that. And you can actually fry them and do things like that. So that part of the tree is also edible.
What about like the sap? Is that?
I don't know. I don't know if pine sap is consumable in some form or not. That's a good question.
All pine trees are okay to eat?
I'm not going to say that. What you want to do is make a specific identification and then make sure you know what you're doing. But there's lots of information on there on how to harvest pine cones. I would say certainly all pine needles are good for tea, and you can extract the vitamin C out of it through the tea process. So, okay, let's talk about hemlock.
Looks like a pine tree.
Well, poison hemlock, all right. Does everybody know what Queen Anne's lace is? All right. Queen Anne's lace underneath the ground is wild carrot, okay? Wild carrot is edible. Don't waste your time, because number one, you have to dig it out, and number two, they're usually really tiny, and number three, they don't really taste that good. But it is part of the carrot family, all right? Well, poison hemlock, we talked about most people can eat the vast majority of edible plants, right? And even if plants aren't edible, you're usually not going to die if you eat a mouthful. A lot of times, in fact, you're going to spit it out because it tastes awful, all right? And that's one way to tell that you're not supposed to be eating that, all right? Well, with wild carrot, Queen Anne's lace, all right, there's a lookalike called poison hemlock, right? And poison hemlock is toxic, and it can kill you, all right? So don't bother harvesting wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace, because A, it isn't worth it anyway, and B, you do have that identification issue, because to distinguish between the two, you're looking at the stems and you're looking at whether one has spots on it and one has hairs on it. You just go, no, don't do that. So that's my take on poison hemlock. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yes?
No worries if you don't want to disclose any hot locations, but do you have any recommendations of like really successful foraging areas in Northwest Ohio?
That's a really great question. Well, one place is a type of place that isn't that great that might surprise you is going into the woods. You know, anytime you're at a park and you're in the woods, all right, there aren't usually, and I mean in the woods, all right, there's usually not a lot of foraging opportunities. And you kind of know that because you're looking around, they're in a lot of green. Why is that? Because there's not a lot of sunshine coming in through the canopy, right? So we know parks are great places to forage, but not necessarily in the middle of the woods. If you go, you know, one of the things I've always wondered about is Bowling Green State University, because it has lots of green space and a lot of it's unused. And I think that when you get away from certain areas that's not chemically treated, if you're going to peruse the perimeter of BGSU, if you don't see any weeds, don't forage there because it's getting chemicals on it. But I've often thought that might be a good place. We live within walking distance of the Historical Museum, which is one of the park properties. And so if you're familiar with it, there's a walking bridge, like a pedestrian bridge down there. So we'll amble down Linwood Road towards the pedestrian bridge, and all the way along that road, past the bridge, now you're on park property, and especially then to your west, as you're on the path heading towards the actual museum, are all sorts of foraging opportunities. And I've found some of the greatest stuff. I don't necessarily have to go to that little garden and pick the lemon dock. There's a lot of other vegetation available there. So those are a couple of ideas. Have you come across any places?
I found some stuff at like the WW Night Preserve, some stuff around Oak Opening.
Uh-huh.
And And then honestly, just like even little patches of trees, again on country roads, I found a lot of stuff just everywhere.
Sure, yeah, yep, very
Ever
good.
tried any of the abandoned railroad tracks? Because we seem to be having more and more of those.
I found some stuff along there too. It feels a little iffy walking along them, but
You-
I've done it, yeah,
You
for
know,
sure.
it's like abandoned, you know.
Yeah, if it's been abandoned for a long time, then you're probably a little safer, right? Yeah,
All the stuff on the slippery elm trail.
That's right.
If you're at the biking and
yeah.
take a bag with you and fill it up as you go.
Dave, you're absolutely right. And yeah, my hiking buddy Ed has one of those stand-up bikes, all right? He goes miles and miles and miles, but he'll get on that trail, and he says he's found the best olive berries along the slippery elm. Yeah, so that is a great place to look. Others? Comments, questions?
Growing up, we had some kind of bush, I don't know if it's a holly bush or what, it had little red berries. I just remember my mom always saying, don't eat those berries.
Yeah.
And, I mean, are there a lot of things like that it probably wouldn't kill you, but probably upset your stomach?
Well, the one that I had mentioned earlier is honeysuckle, because it is a look-alike for the olive berry. And it's just so deceiving because it grows in the same place, it grows to the same height, they both have red berries, and somebody talked about nibbling on the flower, which is fine, but the berries are awful, and as I understand it. And so I wonder, that could be one of those plants where you just have to be careful to make that good positive identification then.
How about forsythia?
I don't know, I haven't tried it.
I think the seeds inside yew berries are the only things I've heard that are like super deadly.
Okay.
Little red berries on like the shrubs, like the berries themselves are edible, they don't taste like anything, but the seeds inside are apparently super deadly.
Okay, I think that's might be.
That might be it, sure. And speaking of seeds, again, my favorite, the olive berry, it's really dominated by a fairly large seed inside the fruit. Eat the seed. Number one, it's very edible. Number two, it is a real source of antioxidants. And so you can actually chew it. And so you've got that sweet berry taste anyway. And when I say sweet, it's really a kind of a tangy, sweet, sour, it's very, very unique. It's why I just think it's a great, alternative to the normal berries.
I was gonna say that you talked about the elderberries, but I just found out like 2 years ago you can actually eat the elder flowers also.
Sure, absolutely.
So I've been making tea and eating those and.
What do they taste like? Because I've not had them.
They're good.
Uh-huh.
They're good, but it's like my tree, I bought one shrub and it already has gotten like 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide. It's so big. I tell my friends, come over and take what you want. And I'm actually harvesting more of the flowers because you can make it to tea.
Yeah.
And then steep them in like vodka for medicinal,
Yeah, I've got a lot of vodka in my medicine cabinet, I'll tell you. It stops my coughing and everything. Do you eat the flowers raw in a salad or something too? Mm-hmm. Yeah. The common thing with most of the edible flower petals is that they're very mild. They don't have that bitterness, and they combine the aromatic quality with a very mild taste. So again, if you think about a tulip petal or a rose petal or something like that, they're just such a good addition to your salad.
It's like that spiderwort one. Have you seen that one?
I think I've actually had that.
It's good, and
Yeah.
it grows like a weed too. It's like
Yeah.
a dandelion, so I'm eating it, and it makes the salad pretty because it's purple, but you can eat the whole thing, but the leaves are not that good.
Well, I have a section in the book about appetizing plants with unappetizing names, and one of them spiderwort. There's something called hairy bittercress. Well, doesn't that sound good? Even purple dead nettle. It's nettle, so it must sting, and it's dead. I'm supposed to eat this, but actually, those are all very edible plants. They just have unusual names.